Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Zunikoff. I am the storytelling director of Teach the Shoah. I see Erwin and Cheryl. Wow, this is such a wonderful group. And I'm here with Deborah Fripp, Dr. Deborah Fripp, the executive director of Teach the Shoah. And we are going to be your co-host facilitators tonight. We know that many of you are here to hear Steve Salzberg. I see so many people from Baltimore, Maryland, where I live, involved in the Holocaust survivor community, where Steve and I both live. This is wonderful. And many people from our national Teach the Shoah community. So as you're coming in, we're going to wait a few more minutes and just let people settle. But please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know a little bit about yourself. If you wish, you're welcome to just sit back and observe as well. But we would love to hear where you're from, what brought you here tonight. And we're really grateful to be in community with all of you. So, Deborah, whenever you want to start.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everybody from me too. I need to let you know that we are recording this with the intent of sharing it with the people who couldn't be here. So just be aware of that, but I am recording it on speaker, so unless you have something to say, you won't be on video, so you don't have to worry about that. And I think we'll get started. Let me bring up the slides. As Jennifer said, this is our Storyteller Coffeehouse. It is actually our first ever Storyteller Coffeehouse. So welcome to the debut of this new type of program. And we are excited to be here with Dr. Steve Salzberg, who will be telling us a story shortly. Okay, so as Jennifer said, we are Teach the Shoah. If you don't know us, Teach the Shoah is a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that the story of the Holocaust remains relevant and resonant. In addition to our storytelling programs, we have a variety of other resources and programming that you can find on the website, teachtheshoah.org, and a variety of programs and consultations that you can get from us. So if you're interested in any of those, be in contact with us, please. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about things that are coming up. Next week on Monday, we have an Exploring Their Stories program. It's a lot like this, but it's a little more workshop and a little less entirely focused on the storyteller, where you'll get a chance to try out the process that Steve's going to demonstrate to you. So it's Monday the 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern, because it's aimed to be in the evening in Europe. It's done in conjunction with an organization in Germany. Also, if you find this interesting, we have a storytelling class coming up in January. It's a 6-week class where you learn to do what Steve is going to show you that we're doing. So please join that as well. So quickly, what's happening tonight? We're going to listen to a story of the Holocaust, and then we are going to spend a little time appreciating that story and noticing what happens inside us as we listen. And then we're going to have a chance to delve into the storyteller's process and ask questions of our storyteller. After we finish that, our session will officially end after about 60 minutes. But if you have time to stay for an additional 30 minutes, you'll have a chance to try this out for yourself using a prompt that we're going to give you. So if you want to try storytelling and you have time tonight, please stick around for a little bit longer.
And Deborah, I just wanted to add one more thing because we have a lot of Baltimore, Maryland people in our space. that in addition to, Deborah, can we show again the slide with from the class
right.
slide? Yeah, so in addition to the slide on the right, the slide on the left that's white and brown is the one about the one-time in Germany, and of course here online, 1 p.m. Monday. But the one on the right is the 6-week course that helps you move from taking a testimony to building a story like Steve is doing tonight. But also, in addition to this course, there is a course specifically for folks in Baltimore through collaboration between us at Teach the Shoah and the Baltimore Jewish Council. And so we have a lot of people here. We just want to let you know that you can also contact us or Emily Braverman Goodman at the BJC to find out about that class. So wanted to put that out there. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you, Jennifer. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us into our story.
Sure. Thank you so much. Okay, so I know that you all have come tonight to hear Steve's story, his story of his Uncle Morris. You know that you're going to hear a Holocaust story, but we just always like to remind you, these are Holocaust stories. They bring up intense emotions. So please take care of yourself as you listen and be prepared to hear some personal storytelling from Steve about his family members. So now we can move toward introducing Steve and a little bit more about his uncle. So, Dr. Steve Salzberg, he has been working in Holocaust education for a long time. He interviewed 38 Holocaust survivors from Maryland for the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. Many of us know that as Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation or Steven Spielberg's project. He was a co-founding member of Generations of the Shoah International, which is an online networking organization that started long before the Zoom era of the past few years. Steve is also the former chair, was the former chair of the Baltimore Jewish Council's Holocaust Remembrance Committee. And from 2004 to 2013, Steve co-taught the Oral History of Holocaust Survivors course with Dr. Uta Larkey and with me, Jennifer Zunikoff, and we co-taught that class to 100 students over 10 years at Goucher College. Steve is a psychiatrist, and he has a specific interest and skill set in the treatment of survivors of trauma. And Steve actually tells the stories of both his father, Louis Salzberg, and his uncle, Morris Salzberg. Tonight we'll hear Morris's story, or piece of Morris's story. And when Steve tells these stories, as you will see, he tells them from the first person perspective. So now we'll learn a little bit more about Morris so that as you listen to the story, you have a sense of his background, his past, and what will come in his life beyond all the details that you hear from Steve. So Morris Salzberg was born on June 19th, 1920 in Lodz, Poland, and he was born into a religious family. During the day, their home was their sweater factory. They owned what Steve's uncle called the sweater machine, and the one machine was the factory. Their small apartment was located just 3 blocks from the area that became the Lodz Ghetto in February 1940. Morris was the oldest of 6 siblings, 4 full siblings and 2 half siblings. And he and his brother Louis, and Louis was Steve's father, they were the only survivors of the family. They immigrated to the United States in 1950, where they settled in the Boston area. In 1951, Morris married Shirley Gold, a Jewish American. Together, they had 3 children, several grandchildren, and many great-grandchildren. And Morris passed away on December 28th, 2014. We are so glad that we can remember him and, in a sense, be with him tonight through Steve's storytelling. So we are going to take down the screen, and now we're going to turn things over to Steve. And I always say this because all of our workshops are really also educational opportunities. So in storytelling, we talk about creating that space and that pause so we can prepare ourselves to enter the story. So we invite Steve and all of you to take a moment and to center yourself. And Steve, whenever you feel ready, we are ready to listen. Oh, one other thing. Please do not use the chat feature unless you're writing privately to Deborah or myself during the storytelling, so it doesn't distract Steve and everyone else. Okay, you can write privately to Deborah or myself if you need to. So Steve, take your time and we will be ready to listen when you're ready to start.
Steve, you're currently muted. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate this opportunity to tell this story. When I tell my uncle's story, it allows me to revisit him. When I tell my uncle's story, I try and tell it in his voice, and I use an accent. I want to make sure that you understand the accent is not meant as any form of disrespect, and it is also not accurate. I'm not an actor. I'm not gifted in repeating someone's actual accent, but this is the way I hear Morris within my mind. And so, as Jennifer said, this story starts in February of 1940. We was told we have to go into this ghetto. What's a ghetto? We don't know. But we're told we can carry whatever we can carry with us in our arms into the ghetto. What did we take? We took a Sefer Torah, Torah scrolls. We took our clothes, we took whatever we could with it, but we wanted to make sure we had a Torah. We thought that would be useful for us in the ghetto. We walked down to the place where you go in. We were greeted by somebody who said, Norman, what is your name? We said, Salzberg. And he wrote down Salzberg, which is how it became spelled. But it wasn't the way that we spelled it. We spelled it Zalcberg. We knew better than to tell the Nazis, you got it wrong, because they would correct their problems, their mistakes very quickly. So we went in, and that's how our name is spelled. We got an address. We were sent to an apartment, one room for me, my brother, my two sisters, and my father, all of us in one room. We had to try and find some space for us to be able to exist together, but we did that. We did what we had to do. We did it. And we're in the room, and then we get an announcement shortly after we arrived. The German army wants all the young, able-bodied men to come down and come work for them, work for the fatherland. They will send money back. That was their first lie. They will send money back to the family here in the ghetto. They need us to work. My brother and me, we look at each other. What should we do? We did what we did often. We decided to do things a little different. Decided one of us would go and the other would stay back with the family. And hopefully somebody would survive. I was the one who. So you may wonder what I had to do after this. I was in the camps. I was in 33 concentration camps. Auschwitz was the middle. 16 before and 16 after. But I did it. For the first part of it, we were building a road. It was the Autobahn. We were building it. And what we would do is dig up the road. We would put down rocks. And after we got it smooth and they could bring tar in to make it a good road, they moved us on to the next section. That's why it was 16 different camps. You worked every single day. Every day, no matter how tired you were, no matter what was going on with you, you worked. You knew better than to say, I'm too tired to work, because they didn't need tired people. So they would take care of that this way. So we worked and worked and worked. And then we finally got to Auschwitz. I don't know how long I was in Auschwitz, actually, because you lose track of the calendar. Who knows what day it is, what month it is, what year? But sometimes you knew a little bit. This you're not going to believe. This is a story. It was 1944. We knew when Pesach was going to be, Passover. And I was working in a factory. We were crammed into a place. There were 200 people in one barracks that had room for 50. But they took care of that. We were skinny, so we could all squeeze in. They didn't feed us. In the section I worked in, there was an oven, which was a furnace. And we would keep that going so that there would be heat in the factory. Well, somebody gave to me some flour. I didn't know who. I didn't know who did it, but we got some flour. And we knew when Pesach was going to be. And so there were three of us in this room, and we decided we're going to make matzah. So the recipe for matzah, the unleavened breads for Pesach, for Passover, is water and flour. And that's what we did. We mixed it together. One of us stood by the door to make sure the guards didn't come. If the guard came, I wouldn't be here telling you this story. But he took care of looking out there. And the other guy and me, we mixed the flour with the water. We made it into little pieces and put it in the oven. Said the prayers, said the Hallel, and we watched 18 minutes from start to finish, according to the Jewish law. That's what we did. We did it. And after the 18 minutes, we took out the matzah. There were little pieces about this size, about silver dollar size. But we did it with all the prayers. You may ask, was this kosher? Yes, this was kosher. I took as many as I could and I put them in my pockets. And then we left and I smuggled them into the barracks. And that night, I gave them out to everybody in my barracks. And there were some very big rabbis there, and they ate from this matzah. We did it. We gave them the matzah. We had matzah that Pesach. I did it. That felt good. This was 1944. We were in Auschwitz for a little while longer. We were there till the war started coming closer to that area. So they moved us. And we got on what was a forced march. That's where the other 16 camps came in. We would march all day long. And they didn't care if we made it okay or not. If you couldn't make it, they took care of you. They got rid of you. So we marched. What did we eat? Sometimes the glass that was on the side of the road. Sometimes they would toss a piece of bread to us or something, but nothing much. The final place we wound up was in Dachau, in Germany. Big concentration camp. We were there. And that's where I was liberated. Liberated. I didn't know what I could do. At that point, I weighed less than 60 pounds. 25 years old at that point, 1945. And I weighed less than 60 pounds. They tried to feed me. They nourished me. They helped me. I could barely walk. I was so weak. They decided that I needed to be able to recover a little longer. So they took me to a camp. This is the Allies took me. I was already away from all the Nazis. They took me to a camp called Feldafing. This is in Germany, out by Munich. But it was a camp that was set up for the Nazi officers so they could have rest and relaxation. So it had good bunks. It had a lake. It had good scenery. It was a place to relax. They let me go there and I got some extra food and I had to just recover. I'll tell you, I picked up a hobby. I learned to fish. I started fishing. Well, I call it fishing. I took a branch from a tree. I put a string on it and I put it into the lake. I never caught anything. I don't know if there were any fish in that lake, but it gave me something to do. You learn to do something. This is what's important. You keep doing things. You learn to do things. One day, as I'm busy recovering, I went to get my food in the place where they give out the foods. And as I'm walking in, I hear somebody yelling and screaming, "You've got to give me food. You've got to give me food. You can't not give me." I say, "Wait, that person, he argues like my brother did." I'm thinking to myself, nobody argues like my brother. Is that my brother? And I looked over, and there he is yelling at this guy. And so I walked up and I tapped him on the shoulder. And he turned around and he says, "What?" And our eyes met. Boy, you wouldn't believe it. He had been there for 3 days looking for me. But when he was over there, I was over here. When I was over there, he was over here. We never saw each other. He was about to leave. If I hadn't come in and heard him arguing, we may not have gotten together. But then we were together all the way. We hugged each other. We stayed together. We slept in the same bunk. We were just together every minute. We weren't going to be separated again. We were together. We'd hear people saying, "Wow, look at those two. How lucky can they be?" Lucky. I come from a family of 8 people. We're the only two that left. That's lucky. Then I look at my brother. Yeah, that's lucky. We stayed together. We stayed in Germany for 5 years, but we decided we had to leave this bloody place. We couldn't be there. There was no place for Jews. So we went from there. We got on a ship and we came to America. At first, they were going to separate us. They're going to send one of us to New Orleans, the other to Arizona. We said, "No, we've been separated for 5 years. You're not separated." So they sent us to Worcester, Massachusetts. What's in Worcester? I don't know, but my brother was there, so I went with him. And we were together. We heard there were jobs in Boston. So we went to Boston together. And we got jobs. And we started to live. We started to have our life. I met my wife, Shirley. Her parents owned a fruit stand. And I went there. And I heard her talking with her parents in Yiddish. I hardly spoke any English. So she was perfect for me to talk to. She could talk with me. We started dating and we got married. She even introduced my brother to his wife. This was a special time for us. But we lived about 40 minutes apart. That was no good. So we both moved to the same town. We lived in Randolph, Massachusetts. We lived about 2 miles apart. We went to the same school, the same synagogue. And we would go there every week. We were part of that synagogue. We were part of the life of that synagogue. We helped build a new big building for them. But in 2001, my brother, he got sick and he kept getting sicker and sicker. And we knew he wasn't going to be around long. in the beginning of 2002. I remember it was Shabbos, January 12th. I went over to his house that Saturday after shul, after the synagogue, and I visited with him. He was in a bed in the living room. We sat, we said Tehillim, the Psalms. We prayed together. His wife was there. She was cooking. She was sitting with him. She gave us time to be alone together. I gave him a kiss, and then I started the 2 mile walk to my house. It was sometime over that walk that I had that he was sitting with his wife, playing with his wife, and that's when he passed. I lost my brother. I got to see Morris a couple of days after, the day after this, when I was up for the funeral. This is me, Steve, talking to Morris. We sat Shiva together, the morning period, and we were talking about things. Morris was a very Orthodox Jew. He didn't use electricity on Sabbath or on holidays. I did. And I told him while we were sitting around, you know, Uncle Moshe, I called him Moshe. Uncle Moshe, I use your story about the matzah at my house, at my Seder. Before we have our first taste of matzah, I play the video. I was really scared because I didn't know how he'd feel about this because he wouldn't use any electrical things in his house on one of these holidays. It's just not what Orthodox people do. And I said, we play it while people are waiting to have their first piece of matzah, and it gives it so much more meaning. I hope that doesn't bother you. And he looked at me and he goes, you do this now already? I said, yes. I would never ask you to do this, but you keep doing it if you're doing it already. And I said, thank you. One of the next time, and nearly the last time that I saw my uncle, was at one of his grandchildren's wedding. It was a big Orthodox event. There were hundreds of people there. And we were doing the horror, the Jewish circle dance, where everyone is dancing and going around and around. And I got to tell you, whenever my family gets together and they have the horror dance, they always tell the band, whatever you think the amount of time it's going to take to do this, double it, and then you won't be surprised when it goes longer. And we were doing that. And I looked over at my uncle while we're dancing around and around. And he has got this smile on his face because there he is with all these Jewish people and feeling comfortable with them. But he also is 93 years old and feeling very tired as spinning around. So I said to him, Uncle, let's go sit down for a minute. And he said, okay. And so we went. We sat at a table and he's looking out and watching his kids, his grandkids, and some of his great grandkids dancing around. And he's just, there's a word we use, kvelling, getting a great feeling from it. And I looked at him and knew that he was where he wanted to be. I said, Uncle, it's so nice to see you. Do you know who I am? And he looked at me and he said, not all the way, but I know you're a nice Jewish boy. I said, yes, I am. And I know that this is what you want. And Uncle Maish, you did it.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Ah, let's all take a deep breath. And so here's the part in our program where I get to ask one of my favorite questions. May I give you some appreciations? Steve, is that all right with you?
Sure.
So Steve just shared with us such a beautiful story, and we invite you, as Deborah already did in the chat, to share any appreciations that you would like to share with Steve about his story that he gave us as such a gift. And so I'm going to share some appreciations with him, and then we will open up the space to give people some time to share directly with Steve as well. But feel free to write in the chat. So Steve, I have heard versions of this story so many times over the years. And yet again, you brought me into tears. I just felt like you really, really brought us in a way I don't know that I've ever felt as much before, that I really was inside his life in so many different sections, that I was there as they were going into the ghetto and having to make sense, having to survive, having to say, what are we going to do? We're going to do it because this is the situation we're in. And then the moment with his brother where they decide one of us at least is going to survive. And then, of course, it always catches me when you say 16 camps, then Auschwitz, then another 16, like, whoa, just so unimaginable. And then you bring us into Auschwitz and yet into this absolutely miraculous story of being able to celebrate the holiday. And the great rabbis, even they said it was kosher. And then when he meets his brother, no matter how many times I have heard that scene, it always is truly unbelievable that there they are. The whole world is completely a mess. And yet they found each other, and that they never parted each other in all those years, decades and decades and decades of life and raising children and getting married and grandchildren. And I felt like you just took your time. You do what we talk about in storytelling. You really went there yourself. You didn't rush. And we were able to go there, even the painful parts. You brought us there, but you also guided us safely out. And when you end it so masterfully with like the circle, the circle of life and dancing with the horror, and he's gotten to this point where he's older and his brain isn't as sharp as it of course was, and that he doesn't quite know that you're his beloved nephew. He knows that he's in a place of love, that he's surrounded by his people. I felt like you brought him back home. Of course, he is home in his resting place, and may his memory always be a blessing, but you brought him home again through this story. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate it. So we're going to open up the space for appreciations, but I just want to let you, because that could be quite a few minutes before you get to share a little bit about your process of creating this story and adapting it over the years. Do you want to say anything just very briefly? Because you'll have that time in a few more minutes, but just a response.
Well, I thank you. The process is always one that surprises me because I never know what's going to come out of my mouth until it does.
Mm-hmm.
But working with Jennifer, much as she hates me focusing on her skill, but working with her teaches me to trust what's going to come out of my mouth. And most of the time it's worked pretty well.
It's beautiful.
And
thank you, Steve. Well, we'll get more of the process in a little bit. I want to invite people to appreciate. Is that all right? So thank you so much. So everyone, here is your chance. You're already writing some beautiful things in the chat, but there's something about hearing this aloud. So Steve really, as all our storytellers do, really shared such intimate spaces inside of him and brought them into our co-created space here. And one of the things we always want to do when someone shares himself like that is to really give feedback back. Like, here's what I heard. and this mattered to me as a listener. So I'm going to ask each person to be brief, so that we can go and get hear from many people. I see Jill's hand. Hi, Jill. Good to see you again.
Hi. I think what I appreciate most about this story, and just any story that's told, is the stuff that I learned. I mean, I don't know why. Did I not know that there was 33? He said, he mentioned 33 camps. Like, I knew there were a lot of camps. I guess I never thought about the total number, and I'm sure maybe that's
Thousands
all
and
of it.
thousands.
Right. I mean, I never really thought about the actual number.
Mhm.
And so I just appreciate, again, just learning, yet another fact. And then, I also appreciate kind of like what struck me most is when they found each other and they were talking about, they're the only, lucky. They were lucky to be together. But that was so hard to swallow in one sense, because everybody else, it was lucky, but it was not lucky, because it was not lucky because everybody else had perished. But then it was lucky because what are the odds of that? And that is just to think, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky to find, someone in my family. I know everybody else is dead, and like there's all these camps, and what are the odds? I mean, and to feel so grateful for that. I mean, that's hard. Usually we feel lucky, when we find, like, like like we win a lottery ticket. That's what we normally associate luck with. We don't associate luck with, like, wow, everybody else is killed, but I found you.
Definitely. It was a mixed, very messed up world. Thank
Right.
you.
It's
Thank
messed
you,
up.
Jill.
That's
Yes. Thank
what I
you.
wanted to say. Messed
Thank
up.
you for your noticing. Really, really thank you. Azriel, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name, I go by Ozzy. Steve, thank you so much for sharing. I think that your story struck me in a lot of ways. First off, because I also have an Uncle Morris who survived, and he and my grandfather were the only two from their family to survive. I think that what struck me the most was the tone, because the tone in which you shared the story was a very culturally American immigrant story, but it was a tone that I've never heard about Holocaust memories. So I grew up in a family where people didn't talk about their Holocaust experiences, and they certainly didn't talk about it in that kind of way. And so I've been sitting with their Shoah testimonials for a long time now, and hearing some of the same types of things being told in a very different tone, to me was very impactful. So thank you.
Thank you, Ozzy. That's just, again, a beautiful noticing. And notice when Ozzy's sharing and what Jill shared, that when we're giving appreciations, not only, of course, are we giving this honoring to Steve and his story, but we are also sharing a bit about ourselves, right? Because our unique perspective influences what we appreciate. So that's why each of us are so important in this space. It's not only about Steve's story, it's about where we connect. So thank you. And Ozzy, I want to encourage you to keep coming to our programs, because this is the exact kind of space. This is, kind of an entry program, but we do these classes where we really go deep into, and there's many people here who have been through our courses and can tell you, but we'd love you, whether with us or in some way, to keep telling these stories and to go into those hard places. Thanks for being here. And you already took a step by sharing what you shared.
And we
Deborah,
encourage you to stick around for the extra half hour at the end to get a sense of how that would feel also.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. So we're going to get Susan and then Alan and then Jeannie.
Just to echo a bit of what Azriel said, I loved the line when they were going to make the matzahs. This you're not going to believe. That just, really I loved it. I mean, I loved the whole story, but that line kind of really made it feel personal and really made it, you know, he was telling the story.
Thank you, Susan. Absolutely. The way Steve embodies his uncle, it really does feel like he has brought him here through Steve being Steve, right? But slipping into the skin of his uncle. It's quite amazing. And Steve is the one that in our course at Gaucho way back when would say about the story that we tell is, Steve, you want to say it? Because it's your line where
No, I'll let you do it.
where your story, where the survivor story and your story come together. Am I saying it the way you do?
Where they intersect.
Where they intersect. Exactly. And so Steve, especially, and I would say this to Ozzy and anybody who's telling about family, it's where you come together with that family member or the person you're interviewing and can't tell everything, but you can choose pieces of the story that really speak to you. So thank you, Susan. Next was Alan Cohen and then Jeannie.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you so much, Steve. And that's my kitty Frankie in the background, if you can see him, listening well too. My comment is maybe similar to the last two, but it was specifically, I thought your accent was great. I don't know if it was that, how close was to your uncle's, but may have been quite close. And I don't know if it seemed like you intentionally, your facial expressions maybe also were like your uncle's. And it really made me feel like I was in his presence. It reminded me of people I've known, including some relatives of mine, with similar accents, or people from, my father was from Poland too, Łomża, but he pretty much got rid of his accent through elocution lessons. But it really felt like someone who had been a refugee from Nazi Germany, from the Holocaust, who was with me. You did a great job of it. I was really amazed by the matzah story and by your running it, the share of running into your brother at that I guess DP camp. How
Alan, thank you. I just have to say, and notice what you just said, Alan, your brother running in. Right, because it feels so much that Steve has become more.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Right, yeah, right. Yeah,
we all do that. We all do that.
That shows how effective it was. I just did dilly. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Thank you, Alan, so much. Thanks for being here. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And Jeannie is also someone who's been in our classes, but also have been telling her stories years before we knew her. Jeannie, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Steve. It was a great story. Steve and I trained for the Shoah Foundation many years ago together. I love the story and I loved the tone. Everybody in the gallery disappeared and I felt as if I were in a room and you were telling me the story. It was very intimate and conversational isn't the word I'm looking for, but it flowed as if you were just telling me the story. I was totally immersed. Very well done.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
I'm so glad that Jeannie was here. I was hoping that she would be. So this is wonderful to bring old friends together. So thank you all for the appreciations. Feel free throughout our session to write any in the chat and we will get them to Steve later because these are treasured. You may think, oh, he knows he did a good job. Everyone already said it, but you have your unique way of seeing something. And it is not only important, it's really essential to our process that you share and kind of complete the circle of the gift he gave to you. So feel free to share something in the chat, even if it was one line that touched you or one image. So we're going to move on to the next piece, which is asking Steve to talk a little more about the process. So Steve, a lot of people who are new to storytelling or who have done it but don't know quite how they did it, like to hear from other people, how did you put this together? So feel free to share about just how the past, month or two you've been working on it, but also in your many tellings over the years, how your story has formed. And you can talk about your father's story too, if you want to reference that.
Well, the process has been one where, first of all, I was teaching this course with Jennifer, and my job was to find survivors and to teach people how to interview. But we had this phenomenon that happened in the class every year. We would start in September. We would get to mid-October, firmly convinced it wasn't going to work that year. And then somehow, through some form of alchemy, Jennifer worked with these students and blew away the entire campus. And I thought, well, I've been speaking about my father and my uncle, but not really telling their stories up until then. And so the final year of the class, I took the class with the students. I taught it and took it. And the process that Jennifer uses, and she's going to blush as I say this, what the hell? It really works. She has this concept of the MIT, most important thing that you're going to say, and everything you have to decide what your most important thing is. And then everything goes from that. And you practice and you just tell it. And you get appreciations because critiques don't help. Appreciations do. Hidden in the appreciations is, you could be a little louder, could be, but you don't. It's like the most gentle critique you've ever gotten, and you start feeling comfortable with the story. For me, when I tell either my uncle's or my father's story, I look forward to it just because it makes me have to revisit them and reconnect with them. And I'm blessed to have their Showa Foundation videos. And I don't know if I ever would sit down and say, I got to watch this, if it weren't for the fact that I was about to present it and I want to be true to them. So the process is getting the facts, getting to know the person, getting to imagine what I would feel. And that's the intersection that I can then present. So that's the process. I don't know if there's other things that.
No. So I was just going to ask a little bit more. First of all, that's one of the brightest kind of in our history, our friendship, and also being colleagues, was when Steve took this class that he was also teaching. And I think what that did for the students to see, here he was the BJC, lay leader of the Holocaust Commission here in Baltimore. And he had interviewed 38 people for the Shoah Foundation at this training. He's a psychiatrist that deals with trauma. And yet you still wanted, Steve, to learn more and to take all the knowledge that you had in this very personal relationship with your father and your uncle. These are sacred stories. And then you said, I want to learn more and I want to bring it to life through the vehicle of storytelling. So it's just such a beautiful thing. And the reminder that all of us, everyone in this room, whether you believe it or not, whether you have a relative who was in the Holocaust or not, you not only have the right to tell these stories and the ability and the raw materials to do it, but we need you. We really need you to be telling these stories and keeping them going. And so I just think, Steve, you inspire us, and that becomes part of the process too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Deborah, should we show some of the pictures? So we have a few pictures of Steve's family that, Steve, you can just share about the pictures as they go by.
This is what I consider to be a picture of 5 generations, because right there in the middle, the picture in the middle is my grandfather. He was killed at Auschwitz. On the far right, as we're looking at, is my dad. And on the far left is my Uncle Morris, whose story we heard. Then behind is me. And then next to me is my son, Alex. And right in front of him is his daughter, Eliza. And so it's all 5 generations getting together and being on a stage. This was at Chizika congregation here in Baltimore and at a Schechter Yom HaShoah program.
Thank you, Deborah. So yeah.
There's Morris, and there's him in his 90s when he was speaking at some place in Massachusetts. I'm not sure where. Was it the Air Force Base, Hanscom Field? I think. And that's his daughter-in-law behind him. Yeah.
And we have another, I think, another picture, another slide.
This is their apartment building in Poland. We were there. I've been there a few times. This was in 2019. It hasn't changed much in all the times that I've gone there. And when I went there with my dad in 98, he said it looks the same. So you can see this slum. First of all, in the forefront is my son and my daughter. So I just have to acknowledge them. But because there aren't very many Orioles fans in Poland. And this just shows you this was the type of place they lived. My dad lived on the first floor to the right of that entry to that little like tunnel. Those three windows on the far right on the first floor are his apartment. We didn't go in there because there are people living there and they didn't want a tour of a bunch of Jews.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Thank you for returning there and bringing your children and sharing these pictures with us. So I think we can take down thanks, Deborah. So we just have a few more minutes before we start to move into the optional workshop section. By the way, it's very low key. You're going to be given some things to look at and to imagine and thinking of an image that stays with you. Nobody's expected to tell a full story, and nobody's going to be telling anything to a whole group. So we just want to let you know. But to keep our last few minutes here with Steve, we have some time for some questions. I see Deborah has her hand up. So we can take a few questions before we have to wrap up. And I want to thank you, Steve, so much for just sharing so beautifully with us tonight. It's going to stay with us, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Deborah, you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Steve, so much. So I have a question. You're a psychiatrist. And I know that when my mother was trying to deal with her trauma of losing her parents, she approached a psychiatrist and said, "Help me, I'm shaking. I can't function." And the psychiatrist said to her, "You're okay, it's the world that's gone crazy." And he didn't feel he could help her. I'm wondering if it's now, of course, many years since, but if you have been able to help any of the survivors that you've interviewed or the students who interview them with the trauma that they probably take in.
I would be there and available to talk with the students as they were interviewing. And that was one of the things that was part of my role there. I have only treated 2 survivors. One of them, it didn't go real well. He didn't like me too much, but everyone has their own tastes. But the most memorable one was a woman who was very depressed, and understandably so, given her experiences. And being a good psychiatrist, I put that in quotes, I thought, well, she needs to be on an antidepressant. So I put her on an antidepressant while we were talking. I'm also a therapist psychiatrist. I put her on an antidepressant and she came back about 2 weeks later and said she'd stopped the antidepressant. And I said, "Oh, why? Was it not helping? Did you have side effects? Was there a problem? You should have talked to me." Said, "No, it worked fine." And I was surprised. I said, "So why did you stop?" He said, "Not ready to feel good yet." And that was a very insightful thing for her, that sometimes the only thing people had left was their grief, their anger, and they didn't want to give it up. I ran into her many years later, and she was feeling better, and she thanked me for what had been helpful, but that she wasn't ready. She felt it was disloyal to feel good at that point.
I can identify with that. I now have a second part of my question.
Mhm.
Some hostages have been freed in Israel, and there is a trauma in the country.
Mhm.
People are grieving. And I guess there is this balance between being happy to be reunited with a few of the survivors, and yet there is this terrible shadow. And I guess, so I'm not exactly sure, talking to a psychiatrist, but also a storyteller, maybe this is the time that some of us can somehow find ways to help these survivors, or even help ourselves in understanding that that there are stories to tell. And maybe, yes, maybe they're not yet ready to say we're the lucky ones.
Right. It's a very hard thing, and it brings up a whole lot of things beyond the scope of today. But I think the best thing we can do for people is to listen. We we have. I once noticed that one of the more comforting prayers we have is the Shema. Hear, listen, hear, O Israel. It's not do this, it's to listen, because we don't know how someone's supposed to feel right now. They don't know how they're supposed to feel. We don't know how they're supposed to feel. But we do know that we can listen to them. And then maybe we can tell their stories.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve, so much. Those beautiful questions, heartfelt. Deborah, one of our very active members and regular storytellers, asking Steve, who answered so beautifully, as you always do, with your whole heart. Thank you so much. What a beautiful way to wrap up this section of our day, where we are in pain and we do have our hearts heavy, and yet we also have the hope and the skills to tell these stories, to keep the joy and the sadness as part of our collective memory. Thank you all for being here. We hope that you will stay for the remainder. Deborah's going to show just some last slides. Thank you, Steve. I know Steve is going to stay for the next half an hour. And
I am?
yes, you had told me that you would a
Oh,
while
okay.
back when I asked. You can change your mind, though, of course. So anyway, so Deborah, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much, Steve, for an amazing program. From all of us at Teach the Shoah, thank you for coming. We have many wonderful storytellers, many of whom are in the room at the moment. And you could be one of them, so please join us for that. Again, I want to remind you, you have another chance to listen to a story in a week. And then a chance to learn how to do this in January. And as Jennifer mentioned, there is also the program in Baltimore. So if you're in Baltimore and you're interested in that program, please get in touch with us and we will give you more information about that. Stay in touch. We'll put some of these things in the chat. And if you can, please stay for the next half hour, because we're going to get to play with this idea and see where it takes us. So with that, I'm going to stop the share. And
thank you, Deborah, and thank you everyone for being so present to the story we hope that if you can't stay, that you will come and join us Monday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Germany time, and for the classes coming up.
Oh,
So Deborah,
and
should we
actually,
transfer
before we
into-
do, I'm supposed
We'll
to
stop the
say
recording.
this. So all of these programs are free to everyone, and but of course we have to pay our coaches and our facilitators and our storytellers. So if you wish, donations are always welcome and helpful, and there's the link to donate. So I'm told I'm supposed to say that, so please donate. And and
The board
otherwise,
speaks.
right?
Right. Tells us.
I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to say good night, and then I'm going to stop the recording, and we will move on to the other part of our program.